In today's video, I'm gonna show you how you can make an exploding Coke effect in Blender. You can use this effect for commercials, for ads, or just for a space VFX scene where a Coke explodes without any gravity. Sup you phonies, how's it going? Welcome to another video, and today is going to be a very cool effect. I'm very excited. I've tried it a couple of times now, and you maybe have seen it in my space scene where lots of things are floating around, and also this Coke can. And I got asked a lot how to make this yourself specifically. If you want to see how to make the space scene, check out my last video. It's right here because it is very cool how easily you can make a scene like that. But today, let's make this Coke. As I mentioned, we make this effect in Blender. For this, we need 4 different objects. We need a camera to capture all of the action. Also, we're gonna need a fluid domain. The domain is the housing basically where our fluid is gonna live. Then we're gonna need a fluid emitter. This is the object where our fluid is gonna come from. And then of course we're gonna need our Coke can. We're not gonna make this Coke can ourselves. I'm just going to use it from Blender Kit. If you don't have Blender Kit yet, make sure to download it. It is for free and they have lots of free models, so go check it out. Now let's start the tutorial. We're gonna delete everything from our scene and start from scratch. I'm gonna start with the Coke can because that's the most important part. So I just type in Coke in my Blender Kit plugin in Blender, and now I can look at different versions of a Coke can, and I'm going to use, this is pretty nice, but I think I'm gonna use this one. So I just drag and drop it into my scene. Now when I look at it, it is actually 2 different objects. I have those droplets and the actual Coke can. Eventually I'm gonna put them into one object. But there's one more thing we need to do before we actually gonna start the animation. I'm gonna go on my Coke can, hit tabs to go in edit mode. Now I want to delete those pieces because the Coke has to come out of something. So I'm gonna select those faces here, hold Control plus plus plus, okay, like this. So only those are selected. Now I hit X and delete faces. Now there's an actual hole in my Coke can. Hit tab again, and that's all I need. Now I'm gonna go on my droplets, go in edit mode, and see which ones I have to delete also. So I need to delete this one, and I think that's it. Now let's delete this one too. Now with Control plus and Control minus, we can either select more faces or less faces. That's a good way and easy way to delete single objects in edit mode. Like this one, for example, I just select a few faces, then I hold Control plus 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 until the entire object is selected. Then I can just delete it with X. Great, I exit edit mode. We're done with this part. Now to keep things easier, I can select both objects, like my droplets and my Coke can. With shift click, I can select them both. Now when I hit Control J, I can join them to one object. So it's going to be easier for me to animate them. Now I'm going to need another object, the particle emitter or the fluid emitter. And for that I'm going to use a plane. So Shift A, mesh, make a plane, make it way smaller. With S I can scale it down. Now I'm going to bring it right where it belongs, right at the Coke hole. One thing to keep in mind is the higher your resolution is going to be, the smaller your emitter can be. So if I don't have that much computer power, I will need to keep this plane a little bigger, because the resolution of your domain basically determines how small can those pieces be. So if the resolution is pretty big, bigger than my emitter, then it can't make any particles anymore. But you're going to see that in a second. So once you're satisfied with the scale and the position of your emitter, let's say like this, then hold Control A to apply the scale. Now with your plane selected, let's call it the emitter, select now your Coke can, Shift Control P to parent your emitter to the Coke can. Now when I rotate my Coke can and whatnot, that's also going to rotate and move my emitter, and that's what I want, because I want my Coke can to be floating around in space, and my emitter is going to come with it. Now we can be a little creative. How do we want to animate our Coke can? I want it to be just floating in space. So all I really need is like 2 different keyframes. So I'm going to determine my first position. So this is going to be my first position. I make sure I'm on the first frame, hit N to bring my item options out. And I hover over location, hit I, hover over rotation, hit I. And then I go to frame, let's say 100. And I'm gonna move it just up and to the left. But I also gonna rotate this rotation, and rotate this rotation. Now I hover over rotation, hit I, hover over location, hit I. Now when we look at it, we see it's rotating like that. The problem is it rotates, it starts moving slow, it gets faster, and it slows down again. That is because our easing is on. Automatically, when we have animation, easing is always on. So you see how it's like curving into the movement, and eventually, just like here, eventually it slows down again, and we don't want that. So we're going to select all our keyframes when hovering over the graph editor, hit A, then hit T, and here we can, instead of Bezier, we can select linear. Now it's abrupt. So it starts the same speed like it stops. Now we can manipulate our graphs if we want to, make some smaller or faster, and yeah, that works for me. So we have it for 100 frames. Let's say our animation is going to be 100 frames long, which is definitely enough to learn this effect. According to your scene, you might want to extend it a little, have it a little longer. Really depends on what you want to do, but for learning purposes, that is enough. Great. Before we forget, turn your emitter off in your render, because we don't want to see this white thing when we render it out. We want it to be invisible. So turn it off in your, disable it in your render. That's very important, because sometimes I don't do that. I forget, because I think, oh, I'm going to do that in the end, but I forget. So make sure to do that while you remember. Okay, now that we have our animation, time to get to the good stuff, which is the fluid. So we have our emitter already. So let's just start with him. Go to our physics properties. It's here on the right. Click on fluid. Under type, it's going to be a flow. It's not a smoke, it's a liquid. It's also not geometry. I want inflow. And under initial velocity, turn this on, and under normal, turn this number up. And this number can really vary depending on your scene. So while we bake and rebake, we always have to change this number. So 5 is a good starting point. What it means is, let me go through them real quick. So normal means the burst of liquid is going towards the normal. So I could change this number to something negative. So it would go negative normal. Our normal is facing up right now. So basically away from our Coke can. So I need positive 5. If I wanted the liquid to go towards x-axis or negative x-axis, I would use initial x or negative x. That's what I would use. If I wanted to go to the back or to the front, I would use the y-axis. If I wanted to go up or down, I would use the z-axis. And that's just for the initial velocity, the burst, which direction is it going towards. And since I want my can to be rotating, I can't use any of those 3. I have to use the normal. So it always bursts wherever the top of my Coke can is facing towards. So +5 it is. And make sure to flow source that it is planar, because we only use one polygon. We only are using a plane. If you use the cube as liquid emitter, you wouldn't need to select this, but you do need to select it if it's just a plane. In order for this fluid simulation to work, I need a domain, a housing where our fluid is living in. So I make another object, Shift A, make it a cube. I'm going to bring it a little higher, and the tricky part is that you want to keep this cube as small as possible, but as big as necessary. So when I look at my animation here inside, I see where the fluid would be going to. So it wouldn't be going to the right at all, pretty much at all. So I'm going to make this cube as small as possible and only bring it to the sides where the fluid is going to go towards. So I don't need anything upwards either. So I'm going to bring this down, keep it as small as possible. And that's very important, because if I just made it that huge, then I wouldn't have any problems. But the problem is, let's say it is big, the resolution changes with the size of the domain. So if I have it that big, I need to crank up the resolution of my fluid simulation, and that would crank up the computer power big time. So you want it to keep it as small as possible. I think that would do. I'm going to bring this one a little smaller. By the way, if you want to adjust the scale of your domain, just hit S, and then when you hit Z, you can scale it up and down on the Z axis. When you hit X, you can scale it on the X axis. When you hit S and Y, you can scale it up on the Y axis. Or sometimes I like to go in edit mode and I adjust one face, so I move this up and down depending on what I want. Either way, when you're back in object mode, hit Control A to apply the scale. Super important. If you don't do that, none of the effect is going to work. See, now the Coke can is moving out of my domain. That's not what I want. I need it to stay inside. So I'm going to move my domain up, apply scale. Beautiful. Now we have to make this domain also a fluid object. So make sure, select your domain, hit fluid. Under type, it's a domain this time. And it's not gas, it's liquid. We're going to keep the resolution 32 for right now, so I can show you the problem with that. And we're going to turn off the border collisions, because we don't want it to collide off the walls. We just want it to disappear. We're going to go through those settings in a moment, but the most important thing is, if you want to ignore everything else, hit mesh, and we also need spray. You can see what it says. It says spray. Those are the particles. We can add spray, foam, and bubbles, which would be necessary if our liquid actually touched the ground, and foam would build on top of it. But we just need spray. I'm going to leave those settings alone for now. Now, the cache is very important. We need the start frame to be 1, the end frame to be 100, because that's our timeline. We could start it a little earlier, so we already have liquid when the scene is starting, but for our purposes, let's just start with frame 1. Now under type, you can use modular. That way you can bake all those things separately. And just to keep it simple, I like to keep it on all. So I bake all of those things together. And one more thing, depending on your scene, our scene is going to be in space or no gravity for like a cool commercial effect. So go on field weights and turn gravity completely off. Now when you think you're ready, hit bake all and see what happens. It is very quickly because the resolution is very low, and normally now liquid would be coming out of this, but it's not. And the reason for that is our domain here. Look at this little cube here. See this? This cube is not reeling in there. This cube just shows us how big the liquid particles are. So if this cube is bigger than our emitter, this thing, which it is, it can't even generate any fluid particles because the emitter is too small. So we need to get this cube smaller. How do we do this? We're going to go down on our domain, free it, and we have to increase our resolution divisions or decrease the size of your domain. Either one works. So I'm going to double this number. I'm going to go back down to bake all, and now you can see already it takes a little longer to bake, and maybe we're lucky it's actually going to generate some fluid. And now we can see it actually generates the liquid into the direction where the can is going. Now we can tweak the settings a little. What do we need to do? So I would like it to have more particles, more spray floating around. And for that, there's a few good settings for this. Under particles, just read what they all do. Basically, you want to decrease this number here, kinetic energy potential maximum. Then just decrease this one, trapped air potential maximum. They all seem to do the same thing, but to be quite honest, I don't know what they all do. I just read what it is, I just adjust the numbers, and usually it helps. Now another one is, we want to increase the randomness. So right now it's 0.1. Let's change it to 1. And now let's just bake it again and see what happens. Now we can already see it generates more particles and it is more random, and that's exactly what we want. So if you still don't have enough spray in your scene, do this. Decrease the kinetic energy potential maximum and minimum by as much as you need. I decrease it to 1 and the minimum to 0.1, and I baked it, and this is the result now. Pretty fancy, huh? And once you're happy with the way your liquid behaves, then you can do the final bake. So you increase your frame number to whatever you need, free your bake, and increase this number to whatever you think is good enough. Just be aware, it's going to take a long time to render or to bake. So 128, I would say, is the bare minimum you should use for realistic effects. 256 is really better, or even double that, which I will not do for this tutorial because it would just take way too long to render this times 2. So let's stay with 128 for this tutorial. Make sure all your numbers are good, and let's bake and see how long it takes. You can already see in this percentage here how slow it is. It's not terrible, it's a pretty small simulation, but again, that can increase very fast if you have multiple emitters, or you have collision objects, like hidden collision objects which can collide inside the coke to spray it out a little more. This is something you can do, but overall, to get this effect done as efficiently as possible, this is all you need to do. Now when we look at it, we can see how far our liquid is actually spreading, and we can see it actually doesn't reach the side of our domain at all. So I always would recommend, remember, like this spot here, and decrease our fluid domain to this part where it actually stopped. So we can decrease the size by a lot, and then when you bake it again with the same resolution, it's gonna look better. Now I did tell you can use collision objects to make it a little more interesting, so let's just try that and I'll show you how you can do it. So I'm gonna make a new object. It can be just a cube, make it small, like right here, apply the scale. I'm gonna rotate it like in a weird direction like this, make sure it's in front of our emitter, so not necessarily inside. Also turn it off in our render because we don't want to see it. I'm just gonna call it collision, and now also I'm gonna shift select my Coke can, hit P, Control P, keep transform, so now wherever my Coke is going, this is also where my collision box is going. And now under here, I'm going to make it another fluid object. Under type, it's going to be an effector. So now our fluid can break through this, which is going to give us a little more interesting fluid effect. So again, I'm going to bake it one more time, and yes, that is normal that you have to bake it over and over because you don't know what you get. And let's bake. So now when we look at it, it's just a little more interesting. And of course, you can always increase the resolution here to double that, then it's going to look even better. But let's stick with that for now. So we need to make one more object, the particle. So Shift A, we're just going to make an icosphere. Before you click away, hit this little icon here and remove some divisions so it's a little simpler. Right click, shade smooth. Now this icosphere here is going to be our spray. So we're going to make a new material for this. Delete the principled BSDF in our shader editor. That's where you can find it. We're going to make a new one. We'll Shift A. I'm going to make it a glass BSDF. Connect that with the surface. Now, when we look at it, it's basically glass, which is also water. So we can change the color now to something more Coke colored, like something like that. And we're going to use the same material. So let's call it actually Coke. Now we're going to go back to our domain. That's our domain here, the liquid. And we're going to give it the same material, Coke. And now here under particles, go on spray, and under render, instead of using halos, we're going to use an object, which is going to be the icosphere. So now if there's any spray going on, that would be the particles, the particle we just made. Now that we're happy with our simulation, the way it looks, now it's time to actually make a camera and get our shot ready. So with Shift A, we're going to go down here, make our camera. With Control 0, we can look through our camera, which I'm going to do on my top view here. So I can just look around in my viewport, and this is where my actual camera is going. You can see it here. I just look around here and the camera is moving around. You do that if you hit N, go to view, and camera to view has to be selected. If you unselect it and move, then it's going to snap out of it. So depending on what you need in the moment, just turn it on or off. So now I'm going to just go to frame number 1, find me a good angle on my Coke can, and I want to start like this. Also go on your camera settings in case you want to adjust your focal length. Let's go wider, let's go 24 mil. And that's how I want to start. And there's different ways to animate this camera movement, but I feel like the easiest way is that you select your camera, then your Coke can with shift selected, hold Control P to parent your camera to your Coke can. So now wherever your Coke can is going, this is where the camera is going to. And in addition to that, you can animate the rotation and position of your camera. So make sure to only select your camera, hover over location, hit I, hover over rotation, hit I, and go to the very last frame and move the camera to whatever position you think is going to look good. So I think something like that would look great. Hover over rotation, hit I, hover over location, hit I. And now with those two movements combined, you get a very cool effect. Of course, you can always adjust it a little. Let's say you want to rotate the camera this way to have a little more abstract effect. You can definitely do that, and hit I and I again. Now when we look at it, it is a very cool effect. Now since the camera is animated, the fluid simulation is ready, now we need to get ready to make look pretty, and for that of course the lighting is important. Right now it's not lit at all, but what I like to do is for scenes like that, I could make my own background and everything, but it's way more efficient if you just go and download Polyhaven, or just go ahead on the internet and download an HDRI, so you can just put it in there and then your scene is perfectly lit. And with Polyhaven I have lots of different cool things. Let's do indoor, studio, high contrast, and let's go with this one. I just drag and drop this in here, and now I have a perfectly lit scene. And now I also can adjust my Coke material. If it's too dark or too bright, I can just make it brighter or darker, depending on what I believe Coke looks like. And the best thing is always to just look at reference. I could spill this on my computer right now and see. It's not sponsored, but this is good stuff. Oh yeah, just go through your scene and look if you like what you see here. And in case you haven't done it yet, make sure you to shade smooth your Coke. It's gonna look better. Now under my camera settings, I also like to add depth of field. So I turn this on and select my Coca-Cola with depth of field. So my entire rest of the scene is gonna be out of focus. And if you use Polyhaven, you want your background to be a little higher res, you can go on your world settings, and here you can see 1K is downloaded. You can download up to 16K, which is not necessary for our scene here, but let's say 4K. And then now it's going to download a 4K version of the HDRI you are using, and then the background is just going to look a little better. And now when you hit render, this is the result. As you can see, I made multiple scenes like that just to practice and see how it works, and this is a very fun effect, and you can definitely use this for commercials for brands like Coke or even beer, whatever your client might be. And if you don't have clients like this, just make a few of those, put them together in a little reel, and send this to potential beverage clients, and maybe they're gonna hire you to make a commercial for them. So thank you so much for watching. If you have any questions, please let me know in the comments below, and see you in the next video.